My name is Alex Pennington, and we are the Aspiring Writers United. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with James Wade. Thank you so much.
Hey man, thank you for having me. This is great, Alex. I appreciate it. I've been doing a little homework, and watching. I saw you with Kim the other day, and then my good
Yeah,
buddy and agent Mark Gottlieb here a few weeks back. And I love what you're doing, and love the information that you're pulling out of these folks, and being able to share it with so many prospective writers. This is a really cool
thank you.
void that you're filling, man. It's good work.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot. So, how did you get Mark as your agent? Where did this all begin for you?
I met Mark. I saw Mark. I didn't meet him, but I saw him at a writing conference 2016 at the Writers League of Texas. The Writers League of Texas, where I'm from down here in Texas, they do just tremendous work with writers published and unpublished alike, and they do a conference every summer called their Agents and Editors Conference, and they bring in agents, editors, publishers from all over the country, and have panels and classes and all this stuff. And so Mark was on a panel, and I was just sitting in on it, and I really liked what he had to say. I felt like his industry knowledge was seemed really sharp, and he seemed like a very grounded dude that seemed to also
Yeah.
get results. And so anyway, I said to myself, if I can ever mess around and actually finish a manuscript, I'm going to send it to that guy, And at the time,
Mhm.
I'd never come close to doing anything like that. I was at the conference because I had won a contest with the Writers League of Texas, but
Well, that's
it
awesome.
was a manuscript contest that only required like the first 10 pages and then an outline. So I had an outline and I
There
had
you
like
go.
10 pages, but I mean, any writer knows that is far, far from finished. And so,
It's not easy making a
yeah, I
good
just kind of
outline, though.
put that back in the memory bank, and said, if I ever do finish a manuscript, that I'll call that guy, or send him a query letter. And yeah, sure enough, I mean, it was 2 or 3 years later, but he was still number one on my list when I did end up sending out query letters. And it just kind of worked out from there that he liked the work and liked the manuscript, and we've hit it off professionally,
Mhm.
and just been going strong ever since.
By any chance, did he like get back to you really fast?
He did, yeah, he
So
really
I
did.
talked to Kim, I talked to Misha. I haven't her video isn't up yet, but like that's his thing apparently. Like if he likes your manuscript, he is like on it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that just kind of goes to show how much how in tune he is to a
Yeah.
writer's needs, because we've been told, our whole writing careers, that it's going to take months for agents,
Yeah.
and it did. For me, I queried Mark, and I want to say I had it in tiers, but I want to say it was like Mark and maybe 10 other agents,
Mhm.
10 or 15, all the same day. And obviously Mark was the first one to get back, because he is kind of known for that, for being
Yeah.
quick on the trigger. And were it not for him, you know, getting back to me so quickly and showing so much faith and confidence in the
Mhm.
work, it would have been probably a tougher decision. I mean, Mark was
Yeah.
my number one. I haven't, uh, I haven't been shy about admitting that. Like, he didn't have much competition. He didn't really have to win me over or anything like that when it came to who I wanted. But some of these other agents that expressed interest later, they didn't. I was already with Mark. I'd already gone with
Yeah.
him, and I think that's how he snagged some good clients early on. You got to take those risks. I don't know if everyone has worked out for him, but certainly it's worked out for he and I.
He seems like whenever he sees talent like that, it's like that's legit talent though. Like I mean, I just seen a lot of his clients over the years, and it's like whenever he gets someone, they're usually going to do pretty good. I don't think I've seen
Well,
anyone
I
like
mean, it's certainly
no
bias
pressure.
of me to say, but yeah, I mean, I think that from the folks that I know that I've met that are on Mark's roster,
Mhm.
um, he's got definitely a sharp eye for not just what is good writing, but also what will sell, and also kind of the lane that he can kind of guide you into. And his, again, like I said earlier, his industry expertise has just
Yeah.
been unmatched, immeasurable, when it comes to not just getting a book deal, but kind of making a career out of it, because those are two separate things.
What do you mean by that? Two separate things?
Well, there's a lot of authors that I know that will get a book deal, which is great. I mean, that's the
Mhm.
goal.
Yeah.
Um, but if you sell one book to one publishing house and then it comes out and it's no secret that it's a very competitive, very
Yeah.
saturated, very tough publishing market and industry, and it's tough to do well. The odds are stacked against us, and so let's say your book comes out, and even if it gets some critical acclaim or
Mhm.
maybe even picks up an award or whatever, if the sales are not there, then when you go to try to sell a second manuscript, then the publishers have hard data, right?
Yeah.
Of basically how your book didn't sell really
Didn't do
well.
well.
And so they're less likely to take a flyer on you, and to give you an advance or sometimes even to
Mhm.
publish your book. And so uh the goal is to not be a one book wonder, right? The goal is to, or at least for me, was to have a sustainable, lengthy career where I could actually, do this for a living. And Mark was instrumental. I was honest with him about that up front, and he was instrumental in making sure that the deals that he's brokered for me have been multi-book deals. They've uh, been deals which build upon one another to where
That's
this is,
awesome.
and I may not be able to do this forever. Hell, I may not be able to do it for 2 or 3 more years. I mean, that's the point, right? Is
Yeah.
it's such a fickle thing, and unless a book hits really well, or unless
Mhm.
Hollywood comes calling, or any of these very low percent chance things that happen to make the careers of artists, unless those things happen, there are times where you have to put the pen down and go
Yeah.
back to the 8 to 5 grind, and and that's okay. I mean, it's the whole point of this is just to have an opportunity for however long and whenever it is to do something you love, which is right. And so Mark has afforded me that opportunity in a way that I probably didn't think I would have otherwise had. I mean, for years and years, I wrote, on the weekends or on my lunch break in the office, those kind of things. I mean, and I think every writer understands that, because we very rarely do you have somebody that goes, yes, I quit my job and quit everything just to start writing.
That doesn't
You know what
work
I mean?
out
It's
well.
yeah. And so anyway, yeah, it's one of those things where if I end up having to go back to kind of the office life, or whatever you want to
Mhm.
call it, back to a real job,
Go
I
counting.
hope I don't have to, but if I do, it'll be okay. I mean, as long
Yeah.
as you can find time to write and do what you love, you'll be all right.
How many books do you actually have to sell to like be a full-time author? I mean, I know like
I
you get a
mean,
lot from the advance usually, like that's usually the majority, but like just having some insight in the industry, like what from a publishing standpoint is a good number of books to sell?
you tell me the answer to that, and we'll be on our way. You know, I think it varies. I think it also varies by advance, right?
Mhm.
If you got a hefty advance, that may allow you to draw out your next project a little longer, but at the same time,
Yeah.
it's going to be a lot harder to earn out, which is something I know you guys
Mhm.
have talked about before, to where when a publisher gives you an advance, they're not just giving you that money, it's an advance against royalties. And so if your book does really well but your advance wasn't that big, well, then you're going to get a pretty big royalty check. And if you get a really big advance but your book doesn't do that well or just does okay, then you're not going to get a royalty check at all, and if you do, it certainly won't be a very big one. And so it has a way of balancing itself
Yeah.
out a little bit in that manner. But yeah, it's interesting, because I really just think it depends on a lot more than just number of sales, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I'm sure somebody in a publishing house could tell you, like, to the number exactly, like, oh,
This
it's
many where you make
yeah,
it or
it's
break
seven
it right
thousand one
here. This is
hundred
the
and twenty
line.
eight units, and that's what it is. But no, I think a lot of it is just potential.
Mhm.
Where do you fit in the publishing house roster? Do they see a long relationship with you? Are you
Yeah.
This is where being just kind and trying to be kind and easy to work with comes in, right? Because if you make friends at the publishing house, like, they're going to be a little more
Mhm.
likely to want to keep you around and stuff. And so yeah, I think it all just really depends. It depends on how many books your deal was for.
Yeah.
And are you writing a series, or are you writing standalone? There are so many variables. And even then, even I know a lot of folks who have done pretty well, or at least what I think is pretty well, but they've never quit their day job for several reasons. One, just the security of having like a salary and it not being up in the air and
Hmm.
based on sales. Health insurance is a huge one, right?
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
if
that
you,
would be pretty bad.
I know folks here who work for the state of Texas, just purely so that they can get the insurance and the retirement benefits and all these
Not
things
a
that
bad
as a
plan.
as an author, as an independent contractor, you're not going to
Hmm.
get those
Nope.
things, and certainly not to the degree that if you're working at a company or for a government entity or whatever that
Mhm.
provides that. And so, yeah, there's really a lot you have to think about. And I was asked this recently. I was doing a conference out in Odessa, Texas, for the Writers League of Texas, and one of the questions that uh, one of the attendees asked was, how did you transition from being a part-time writer or in your spare time writer to full-time? And you know like, when did you know? And the answer is, I still don't know. I still don't know if I made the right call. I am a full-time author, and have been now for several years, and so far it's worked out. But at the same time, you're only one book or one bust or one medical bill or whatever
Yeah.
away from being in a little bit of a pickle. And so my answer to him was, since I was a little kid, 4 or 5 years
Mhm.
old, I wanted to be an author. Like, I didn't do the astronaut thing or the superhero, the firefighter. I wanted to be a writer since as long as I can remember. And if I did not at least try to do this now, try to live out this dream of being a
Mhm.
full time writer now, then I doubt that it would be afforded to me later. And certainly, as my family grows and responsibility grows, I don't know that I would be comfortable leaving my job, leaving a job. So yeah, so I just kind of took the opportunity when it presented itself, and whether or not it was the right call is yet to be seen. But what I do know is that I am extremely grateful for the days that I have where I get to do this, where I get to get up and go to work in at home and writing and reading and trying to grow as a writer and a reader and a thinker and a person, and all
Yeah.
these
I mean,
things
you're
that you
doing
always
it.
wish you
Like,
had time to do, and so even if I don't get to do this forever, I am getting to do it now, and I can't help but just be supremely grateful for that.
how did it feel when you got that call from Mark? Like, I mean, that's like you made it. Like, man, like I just can't even like fathom what that would actually feel like.
Well, so I'll tell you, and this is without going too deep in the weeds. So my wife and I was working in politics, legislation in Austin. My wife was a real estate agent, and we were both just running ragged
Oh
for
yeah, I
for
can only
years and
imagine.
years. And we, uh, long story short, we donated like 70-80% of our possessions. We bought a 144 square foot tiny little travel trailer and,
Mhm.
and an old truck that would just barely pull it. And we spent 2 years traveling the country, living out of that little camper, in free camping
Mhm.
and boondocking in national forests and BLM land and all this stuff. And so when when Mark called to offer representation, we were in the Black Hills in South Dakota, parked in a field, and I had such terrible cell phone reception, I could barely hear him. I had to like jog up this hill. It's like there was like a storm rolling in. I mean, it really was a calamity of
Like
errors
the
at the time, but I was able to
perfect.
get reception and talk to him. And of course, I was ecstatic, and everything was great for like 5 minutes. And
Huh?
then I looked at my wife and I was like, I might be what if I'm the first person that Mark Gottlieb can't get a book deal for, because Mark was like number one in everything. I think he still is,
Yeah.
but he's number one on Publishers Weekly as far as deals done, debut authors,
Mhm.
all these different metrics. Mark was number one, uh, as well as Trident Media, the where he works out of, and so I was so ecstatic. But then the very first thing I thought was like, well, I guess what if I'm the first one that he can't, get a deal for? And I think that speaks to just the absolute superpower level of self doubt that I think most
It's
authors have.
scary. Or like, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like you doubt you'll get an agent ever, right? Because like that's impossible. Then you get an agent, it's like, I'm gonna be the first one that fails.
Yeah, well, even finishing the manuscript, which I think I had like finished the manuscript for All Things Left Wild, my debut novel. I think I finished that maybe 2 weeks or so before we started querying, or it was something like that. It was the summer of 2018, and I was so happy that I had finished it. And there's a video that I still have that my wife took of me popping a champagne bottle and
That's
saying, "I
awesome.
don't care if I ever get an agent. I'm so happy I wrote this manuscript." Well, that was true at the time. But then again, like, I wake up the next morning, I'm like, well, if I could just get an agent. And then once I did have Mark, I was like, well, if I could just get a book deal. And it becomes one of those things where you have to find that delicate balance between
Mm,
wanting to take the next step and wanting to get better and wanting to, improve and all those things, go further, but also being grateful for what you have and being happy
mm,
about, the victories along the way. And certainly I looking back on it now, I probably rushed past some of those significant milestones and was just always wanting that next thing, and
yeah.
so I've had to work
You're
on that.
ambitious.
Yeah, well, absolutely, absolutely.
And
But
just
what
deadlines.
is ambition if not a kind of a lackluster feeling about the status quo, and
Mm,
and I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that guy. I want to be very appreciative of and present for everything along the way. But certainly in the past, I was not like that, and I think but I do think it's tough for writers. I think because
yeah.
as you reach that next step, maybe you thought it was never attainable in the first place. And so once you get
Mm,
there, your mind kind of clicks and goes, well, shit, if I got here, maybe I could
yeah.
get there, and so, and
Now I need
again,
to get
that's
to
not
that
all
next rung and
bad.
that
I,
next
I don't
rung.
think.
What do you think it was in your query letter that like really hooked Mark?
Man, that's another one of those industry questions that I just don't know if I'll ever understand. I know two things. One, I think it probably helped that I had seen Mark on a panel and was able to say, hey, I heard you speak at the Agents and Editors
Yeah.
Conference in 2016. Not only because that kind of made it more personal for him, but
Mm,
also it shows agents that, like, oh, this person, this writer's taking it seriously. They were at this
yeah.
conference, or whatever. And I had a few feathers in my cap again with the Writers League Texas contest, and then I had some short fiction published here and there. But as far as the letter itself, I took a query writing class
Oh
with Becca
wow.
Oliver, the executive director of the Writers League of Texas, and because I just thought, if you're going to bust your ass writing an 80,000 word
Yeah.
novel, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
100,000 words if you're writing sci-fi or something,
Mm,
if you're going to put all this work and time into this, it seems very unfair that it comes down to like a 200, 300 word query letter, right? And
single
so I
page decides your future.
yeah, decides if they're even going to look at it, or what their attitude may be going into it. And so so I took a query writing class, and I definitely will give all the props to Becca Oliver on that one, because she used to be an agent, and so she kind of knew
Okay.
what folks were looking for. And so I think the combination of those two things, being able to have a few feathers in my cap going into it, and then also Becca really helping refine and hone on exactly what a query letter is and what it's supposed to look like.
Mm,
I think those two things helped a lot. And then, of course, I'd like to think that the actual description of the
great
novel
book.
drew Mark in, and I'm sure it did to a degree.
Uh,
But I think even some of the best ideas can be buried by poor query letters. And again, that doesn't
I,
seem fair, but
I've
it is
heard
just kind of
that.
part of the industry.
So you said that you're an outliner?
I I am and I'm not. What's it? What do they call it? They call it a plotter or a pantser, and
Yeah.
I'm in between. I'm like a
Mm,
planter. I kind of do a little. I do a little
a
of
little bit
both.
of
I
both.
I in the classes I teach, I tell my students that an outline is like bones, right? It's the bones of the story, but bones break. So just because you do an
That's a
outline
good way
doesn't
to
mean you
put
have
it.
to
I
stick
like
to it.
that.
And just because you're going in with one idea doesn't mean that it has to be the end all be all,
Mm,
or anything like that. And so I just kind of I want to have an idea of where to go, just so I don't find myself staring, at a blank screen, or so I don't find myself having written half the novel and realizing that I've written myself into a corner I'll never be able to get out of, or something
exactly.
like that. And which those things do happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's happened to me even with outlines before. And so so I try my best to kind of keep that balance between having a plan and then also leaving myself room to feel it out as I'm going.
So you're a teacher also? Like I assume you teach writing?
Oh yeah, well, not at any institution or
Mm,
anything, but there are different entities. So I'll Writers League of Texas. I'll teach classes and workshops.
that's
There's a
awesome.
great group called the Happy Writers
Heard of them.
that Brian Murphy started. He has
Mm.
a podcast that's been running for years called How Writers Write, and then he
Oh
branched out
yeah.
and started kind of this. It's essentially it's like a writers Facebook. It's like its own little
Oh,
social media app, and it's called Happy Writer. And
that's
I've taught
cool.
some classes for them, and then of course I speak to writing groups, and I
Mm.
speak to uh, you know different panels, anything like that, anything that has to do with craft or writing. It's not hard to
Wow.
get me to come and talk to folks, and so yeah. So and I always kind of give the same similar spiels when it comes to all that stuff.
What is like the one piece of writing advice that like really made it click for you? Like to go from, probably a not amazing first draft to published book.
Ooh, I mean, it would be tough to narrow it down, but honestly, I think the biggest thing for me, and it usually is this way. It's usually not something that is so specific or so
Mhm.
uniquely craft based. It's usually a lot
Yeah.
more mental, right?
Okay.
That's what I usually find, and so the biggest thing for me was to realize that there is no one way to do things, and that may sound
Yeah.
corny or it may sound obvious, but at the same time, like
Mhm.
if you haven't seen it written a certain way, or if everyone else is saying no, you have to do it this way, then couple that with the self-doubt that you already
Yeah.
have as a creative person or as a writer, and you can start to think that it has to look or feel or sound a certain way. And so the first time that I realized that it's a very liberating, very terrifying thought, right? That as the writer, you are in control. You don't have to answer to anyone.
How
And the
good
first
this
time that
sounds.
I truly believe that, it kind of opened up the doors for me a little bit.
So what is then your like writing process? So you're an outliner, but like so you're writing full time. Like let's say you got a new book idea. How do you go about actually writing and structuring it?
Yeah. So I'll start, like I said, with a very loose outline. I mean,
Mhm.
just as minimal as possible. I think, like a lot of folks, when I have an idea, I have the beginning of an idea, so maybe like the first couple of scenes, so to speak, um, and then maybe an idea of what the ending's going to look like. The middle is usually what comes last for me,
That's always the hard
and
part.
yeah, and in doing that, a lot of times the ending will change, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll get the middle and I'll get the end all set, and I'll go, well, I need to change the beginning, and all of that. I leave myself room for all of that because I want it to be as natural as possible. But the process is honestly pretty simple. Is when I can help it, when all things are clicking and the calendar says nothing but right. It's just coffee in the morning.
There you go.
Maybe look at the news, try not to throw up, and then read a few paragraphs of some writer, some book that I
Mhm.
admire, that gives me inspiration. Something I say a lot is, no matter how many times I see live music or anything like that, it doesn't matter how big the act is or how great the musicians are, you will still see the drummer and everybody else. They'll tap their feet a little bit to
Yeah.
count themselves in to get into rhythm,
Mhm.
and that is what I do when I read. If I
Okay.
open a Cormac McCarthy book and read a few paragraphs or a few pages, all that is just me kind of trying to get into rhythm a little bit before I actually start writing, and then just go and just let myself go as long as I can in the morning. I'm definitely a morning writer, always have been. It's before the day beats me down.
Mhm.
And so I let myself go as long as I can, take a little break, more coffee, a little bit of food, a little bit of fuel, and then go again. And depending on where I'm at in the novel and depending on what's going on in the world around me,
Mhm.
I like to go for 4 to 6 hours a day. Sometimes that's not possible, and sometimes I have to go longer, honestly, if I'm on a
Yeah.
deadline. But kind of the ideal for me is 4 or 5 hours, and and very focused, very meaningful, intentional pages. That's the other thing is I freak people out because I don't really do drafts. And the reason, but I take just as long as everybody else. It's just because I write a little slower, meaning I kind of edit as I go a little bit.
Okay.
I would rather have, if I write 700 words and 500 of them are keepers,
Mhm.
then I would rather do that than write 2,000 words and
Yeah.
have only 500 be keepers. And so I try to make it a little more intentional as I'm going through the process. That way, when I'm done, there's a lot less to do, because honestly, and I don't know about everybody else, but I know this of some writers, it's certainly true of me. When I'm done with a book, I really want to be done with it. Like I hate going back and
I
changing
don't want to
things and
read this.
editing, and I know it's part of it, I'm never gonna like it. And so I try to leave myself as little as possible to have to do once I finally type,
Mhm.
the end or something like that.
What's a good word? Like, so you're writing for 4 hours. Like, what is that word count wise?
It really depends, right? So,
Mhm.
and I think most writers can relate to this. If it's a dialogue heavy day where there's like, there's a lot of back and forth
Oh
and
yeah.
kind of action scenes or,
Hmm.
or whatever, then that word count's going to be a lot higher because it's a lot
Yeah.
easier to write
You're
dialogue
you're
very
in it.
quickly. Yeah, but
Yeah.
if it's a a day where I'm kind of setting the scene and I'm writing some descriptive copy about the setting, about what
Mhm.
the weather looks like or the woods or whatever. I'll probably take my time a little more, and so the word count will be lower. But my average word count is about 1,000 a day.
That's pretty
If I
good. That's
do
good.
again, if I do 500, I'm happy. That's not a bad
Mhm.
day. And if I do 1,500 or more, then certainly I'm thrilled if it seems like something that's going to be keepable. When I started writing, it was much closer to 2,000 a day. That was kind of the goal. But that is kind of inched down as I've learned to just be, again, just a little more deliberate, a little more intentional with what I'm writing, so I don't have to go back as much.
Sorry, my microphone. I realized was like falling, falling
No
off. My
worries.
um, is Cormac McCarthy like your kind of inspiration?
Oh, I mean, you mean our Lord and Savior Cormac McCarthy?
I love.
Yeah,
Oh, he
yeah. I
is
mean,
such an
so
amazing writer.
there are a lot of influences, obviously. Anybody that's a writer is 9 times out of 10 going to be a pretty big reader, and you can't help but be influenced by the folks you read. And certainly Cormac is my favorite author, and therefore he's probably my biggest, and well, I say probably, he's definitely my biggest influence. But uh, he himself was influenced by Faulkner and Melville and some of the same authors that we all read. And so I'd be remiss not to name them as well. But and then on the flip side, folks that have been influenced by him,
Mhm.
writers like William Gay, they're even Flannery O'Connor, with her dialogue, especially in the Southern style. Like there are so many writers that influence me, even those that I don't necessarily like. Like I'll read a novel and go, well, that's what I want to not do, right? Like that's
That's the
I mean, they're just
opposite of how I want to write.
yeah, exactly. Like I don't think that you can ever read anything and not take something away from it as a writer. Even if it's like I said, even if it's what you don't want to do, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you think it's bad, right?
Uh,
I think there are phenomenal authors that it's just that their style is not the one that I want to, mimic or use as an influence. And but yeah, Cormac is definitely number one. And I know I know that's not very original. I know it's not necessarily groundbreaking. I know there are a ton of folks that that see themselves that way. I actually talked to I talked to an editor who had worked on some phenomenal books, including Water for Elephants.
mhm.
Had edited a couple of Larry McMurtry's books, and he told me candidly, he said, "I love Cormac McCarthy, but sometimes I wish he'd never written a fucking word because everybody has, or not everybody, but certainly there's a giant sect of writers."
Mhm.
That have tried to mimic him, unsuccessfully, and I'm sure it gets very laborious to read. And so it was always important to
You
me.
get just bogged down in the details.
Yeah, and it was always important to me to, even though I'm certainly always going to pay homage
Mhm.
to Cormac, just again based on the influence his style has had. I do want to write in my own voice, and of course, that being said, even if I were to try to copy, if
You'd
and this is
settle
where
for
most
being
people I
the
think fall
Cormac
into this
McCarthy.
trap. Yeah, if you try to really, copy the great writers, you're
Mm,
gonna be sorely disappointed, because it's not. That's why they are who they are, and so it's a lot more honest, and usually a lot easier
mm.
to just follow your own path, and find your own voice, even if it does have an echo, of their style or influence.
Well, so this is my hot take on Cormac McCarthy. I hated The Road. I'm sorry, but like I got so bogged down in those details. Like it was, I'm like, oh my gosh. But then I picked up No Country for Old Men, and it was like this super fast paced thriller and just amazing. I'm like, how did you go from this to this? Like these are like
Yeah,
polar
well,
opposites.
yeah, it's interesting, and not to flex my super nerdy Cormac historian chops, but it is kind of fascinating, the progression of his writing style, to
Mm,
where kind of his middle career novels like Suttree and Blood Meridian,
yeah.
um, they fall into that category that a lot of people have, just like what you said, where they're like, I wanted to read this book. I tried to read this book, but I got so bogged down. I mean, I know people that have tried to read Blood Meridian multiple times over multiple
Yeah.
years, and still were not able to get through it, because sometimes it can be a slog. There's a lack
Mm,
of plot. It's just there's a lot of
it's
it's
like
metaphysical and
art.
biblical language, and so all of these things. But by that same measure, then as
Mm,
he progressed in his career, like with All the Pretty Horses, that's a much
yeah.
more approachable book. And then certainly by the time he got to No Country for Old Men, in the early 2000s, that reads like just a really well written, like almost like, yeah, like you said, like kind of like a quick
Mm,
thriller crime novel, and
like
it's
it had
still
those
it's still
details, but it was so fast moving.
yeah, it's still, that's what I was gonna say. It's still very much Cormac, and it has his stamp on it, but it's just so much more approachable and such a quicker read. And well, and I think that's it's not a coincidence that that is the most successful movie that's
Yeah.
been made out of all of Cormac's books, right? It's because that's the one that read the closest to a screenplay, the closest to a fast moving,
It's like he wrote it with
action
that in
whole
mind
deal. So
almost.
yeah, absolutely.
I think it's funny, it's a little sidetrack. Have you ever read a book that you just couldn't read? Like you want to read it, but it's just not working?
So to this day, I have tried so many times to read James Joyce's Ulysses. Everybody,
Yeah,
like so many
too bad.
people have that at the top of their list
Mhm.
in terms of, like honestly, like greatest books ever
Yeah.
written. And so I really, really want to read it, and I vow one day before I die that I will. But I've started it probably 3 times, I guess, over the past 10
Mhm.
years, and for one reason or another, again, whether it's external circumstances or not, it just always seems like I just get a little bogged down, and I don't think I've ever
Yeah.
made it through like the first quarter, and it has nothing to do with, I mean, Joyce is a phenomenal writer, and the prose itself is spectacular. But I start getting bogged down in kind of the
It just like pulls you
Joyce's
out.
version of Dublin, and again, just the detail is, as a
Mhm.
writer, it's great, and I'm like, hell yes, do it, man.
Yeah.
But as a reader, sometimes I'm just like, okay, what's next? What's next?
So I wanted to read Dante's Inferno.
Okay.
And to the point I spent like 100 something dollars on this fancy leather bound Easton Press. Like it was so cool. And so I'm reading, I'm like 10, 15 pages in, I'm like, I don't feel like I'm getting this. And then I keep reading, I'm like 40. I'm like, I kind of know what's going on, but like, so I went on the internet, I'm like looking up like chapter summaries and stuff. I'm like, I'm not getting any of this. They're like, and it was so frustrating. I'm like, I'm trying so hard to read this, but there's like a disconnect in my brain.
And I think you find that a lot with older texts and older
Yeah.
writers, and I don't think we're probably hard on ourselves a little bit as readers. It's one of those things. If you look at like classic movies, oh, these are the
Yeah.
best movies ever made. Well, it's not that they're not, and it's certainly
Mhm.
not that they're bad, but like we've been programmed a little bit, as
We really
as
have.
conspiracy theorists as that sounds, like we have been kind of our heads have been turned in a certain direction
Mhm.
for what an exciting film should look like aesthetically. Same thing with books, like that. And
Yeah.
again, going back to you asked what was one of the best pieces of writing advice that
Mhm.
made it click, and I just, for so long, I heard that, like, well, you've got to have a plot where the reader won't put down the book, right? I can't tell you
Oh, it's
how
that
many
easy, huh?
times
Just
and how many
just have
different
a
places I
plot.
heard, you don't want the reader to put down the book. You want it to be a page turner where they don't ever
Uh,
stop. And finally, I thought, well, I'm a reader, and I
uh,
really enjoy putting down the book and thinking about what I just read,
yeah.
and having it, and kind of letting it wash over me a little bit, whether
Mhm.
it's a particularly beautiful combination of prose, or a profound thought, or a thought that maybe I hadn't considered before, or that I disagree with. Even
Yeah.
sometimes that's the best
That
kind.
can
And
be,
so
yeah.
so I'm like, well, wait a minute. If I'm a reader and that's the kind of book that I enjoy and the
Mhm.
kind of book I'm looking for, then maybe as a writer, I don't necessarily need to listen to everyone that says, oh, it has to have all these twists and turns, and you got to keep the reader guessing and turning the page, and don't spend more than just a couple of lines talking about this because you want to keep everything moving. None of that is wrong, because that's the point. Is that there
Yeah.
is no, at least for me, there is no right or wrong. I enjoy a escapist, almost like
Mhm.
guilty pleasure, super fast read, just a beach read, just as much as
Yeah.
anybody else. But the books that stick with me, the books that I return to and reread, or have bookmarks, all in
Yeah.
certain passages, are the ones that were a little more challenging,
Mhm.
but also that just made them a little more meaningful. And so yeah, so I think that that's a lot of times when it comes to certainly those texts that have been studied for hundreds, if not thousands of years, there is definite benefit and worth there. But sometimes we have to dig a little deeper, and sometimes, quite honestly, it's just not in the cards, right? I mean, it's if you're going to work Monday through Friday, and you've got a birthday party or a wedding, or
Uh,
whatever on the weekend, yeah, when are you supposed to, like, just bust out Dante's Inferno and study the different
easy
rings of
breeze.
hell? I mean, it just there we have to give ourselves,
Mhm.
it's a balance, right? We have to be disciplined, we
Yeah.
have to give ourselves a little grace from time to time as well.
You were talking about like fast paced and only a couple sentences. I was thinking of Tolkien is literally the opposite of that in like every way.
Right.
Like this man's like, you know what? I got 2 pages here. We're gonna talk about this river. Like you're
That's
gonna
right.
you're gonna
That's
know
right. I
about these
love it.
trees.
Or like, let's spend uh paragraph upon paragraph talking about the feasts,
Oh
and this
yeah.
and that. I mean, look, one of the most notorious overwriters, I think, in American literature is Thomas Wolfe, who wrote Look Homeward Angel, and Of Time in the River. And the reason I say he's a notorious overwriter is because he was known for bringing in these giant stacks. I mean, like wheelbarrows full of pages to his then editor, Maxwell Perkins, and they would go back and forth on what needed to be cut and what needed to be left in, and I get the sense from having read a lot of Thomas Wolfe that Maxwell Perkins did not win every battle, because there's stuff in there, and I'm glad, for one, as a reader and certainly as
Uh,
a writer, I'm glad that it made it in. But like, for instance, in Look Homeward Angel, there is, I want to say, about 3 pages consecutively
mm,
that describe every smell that the main character smelled from the time he was in his crib, or the time he was a toddler, to the time that he started school. It's just like three
crucial
pages of,
detail to the story.
yeah, of what he smelled in the fall when the fire was crackling and he was playing on his little baby blanket, and the toys, and the
Mm,
different foods and apples and bacon and
yeah.
cider, and then how it smelled in the winter when everything was being smoked or cured, or whatever, and then the spring with the blossom and the
Mm,
honeysuckle, and I mean, he literally just goes on this tangent of smells. And I think that there probably are a fair amount of readers that would just either skip that or go, what
mm.
is this guy doing? But I'm just looking at it eyes wide, just turning each page, just
Some
going like,
people are
this is
like, this is
amazing, just
genius
like really
right
nerding
now.
out.
It's like you got half of them are like, this is horrible. And the other half are like, this is art. This is beautiful. I'm like
Yeah.
so immersed in the story.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Which is a great point, because look, you're never gonna please everyone. You're never
Mm.
even gonna please most folks. So I mean, you just have to write what you want to write, and the way that you want to do it, and hope it works out.
Yeah, you never know. Like, I hear this all the time. Like, people think like, oh, my story for the market or it's not the most original, but it's like you kind of just got to write your own story. It's like you never know if it's gonna be the next big hit. Because like, I mean, I think
Absolutely.
you can go
Yeah. I
look
mean,
at
that's
any story and
no one does. Even
yeah,
even the folks that are publishing these books, they have no idea.
no
You
idea.
know, they take a educated guess based on the
Mhm.
market or this and that, but you never know. And if you try to write for
Yeah.
towards a trend or towards what's popular,
Mhm.
it's very likely that by the time you're finished and by the time the book's going to come out, it's not going to be popular anymore anyway.
Did you ever struggle with like originality? Because I know like that gets a lot of writers. Who are like, I'm just not original enough. Or I,
Um, I honestly, I, I can't say that I have.
Mhm.
My struggle comes more from at this point in my career from what we were just talking about, from trying to get the voices out of my head that are trying to tell me
Yeah.
what might sell well.
Mhm.
Like, oh, what's
Okay.
hot right now? What's a socially relevant topic that you could somehow weave into this
Mhm.
story? Whereas most of the themes of my first three novels are not sexy. They're not, I mean, when I say they're not current, to me they're current. To me they're timeless, right? I like
Yeah.
to write about life and death and
Mhm.
the purpose or lack thereof and how that plays on our minds as we try to make our way in the world and
Yeah.
coming of age and loss of innocence and all of these things, right?
Mhm.
None of these are original, but I think that they are not necessarily talked about enough, is certainly in
Yeah.
modern literature. And so I write with that kind of frame of mind. And I think a lot of times I'm an outlier there because it seems to me anyway, and maybe this is just me wishing
Mhm.
that, that like, oh, I wish that I was,
Yeah.
in New York Times or whatever. But it seems to me that a lot of the books that get notoriety or that get a lot of
Mhm.
buzz have some very real and tangible connection to what is in the headlines
Yeah.
today. And
Sometimes.
so, but again, credit to those authors because it is very likely that they did not write with those headlines in mind because
Yeah.
they probably started the book 5 years ago,
They might just
and
got
so it just
really
happened to
lucky.
line up and coincide.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I feel like that would be kind of hard though, because I know that's a definite thing. Like people going, okay, this is the trend. This is the big social issue. I'm gonna, write my book around this. And it's like, yeah, that might be the social issue now, but it's
Right.
like, give it a year or so, and that will be just completely irrelevant, probably. Heck, give it a
Yeah,
month or
yeah.
two,
I
it'll
think it. I
probably
think it
be
is just.
irrelevant.
I think it is for most of those authors. Again, I credit them because I think it's things that are very personal and close to
Mhm.
their hearts, and then it just so happens to line up maybe with what we're talking about, in the moment that their book's being published, which is great because then it gets more eyeballs on the book, and
Yeah.
I don't ever think that that's anything but good. I mean, rising tide lifts all ships, and I want people to sell. I want every author to sell a
Yeah.
million books if they can, and so yeah. I mean, it just again, it really just kind of comes down to. I remember like when Twilight came out and was a huge thing, and all of a
Everyone
sudden,
started doing
all of
that.
these other vampire books started flooding the
Uh-huh.
market, and now you don't see that anymore, right? I mean, that's that's
Kind of died
that's an
down.
obvious but still again relevant example of how trends come and go. And so if
Yeah.
you let's say you saw all these vampire books in whatever the hell that was, 2009,
A
2010,
while
and you go,
ago.
I'm going to write a vampire book. Well, by the time that you write the book and then try to get a
Mhm.
deal, and then your publisher takes a year to publish it, your book's coming out, and people are going,
Yeah.
"Oh God, I'm so tired of vampire books. Like,
Another one of
I'm
these.
not going to read that one."
Well, because that was like the whole the Hunger Games. Like as soon as that caught fire, like I swear there's like 10 different teen series that are all like going against the totalitarian government.
Oh
And
yeah,
people kind
yeah.
of
It's
make
it,
fun
it
of it
went
now.
well.
It's
That
like,
was
wow,
basically it. It went from
mm,
vampire fiction to like
yeah,
dystopian
it did.
fiction, and you see again, we're gonna see those trends, and they're gonna ebb and flow.
Mhm.
And I just I will probably I will probably never write a book that is on trend, but that is more than okay with me.
But you do have your vampire dystopian novel just
I have
sitting
my
there
vampire
to come
dystopian
out.
novels put away for when as soon as that trend starts to come back even a little bit, I'm just gonna throw it at my publisher and I'm gonna go, look, we've got vampire, werewolf, dystopia, whatever the political topic is,
Insert the new political stuff.
yeah,
Mark,
absolutely.
I have a bestseller for you. I'm gonna make your day. So where did the idea kind of come for your books? Like, where did that kind of begin?
Yeah, so each one is different. And I don't have like a clear I don't have a clear method because
Mhm.
each book has come from a different place and a different process. My debut novel, All Things Left Wild, which came out in 2020, literally came from a poem that I wrote when I was just I mean, this is so cliche, but I was looking out. I was camping in outside of Carlsbad, New Mexico, and I'm looking out at the desert, and I'm inspired, and I write this poem, and then I take the poem and I turn that into like a paragraph, and I don't know if it's going to be a short story or anything at all, but I write this paragraph, and it was of uh, two boys on horseback in a windstorm in the desert. And the obvious next question is, what are they doing in this windstorm?
Mhm.
And I said, well, they're running from someone. Well, why are they running? What
Yeah.
happened? And so I basically started building the novel out. I didn't have an outline or anything for that one.
Huh?
I just started building the novel out from this scene of these two boys in this
Cool.
windstorm, and it all worked out. And that was
Mhm.
without any semblance of an outline, that was the fastest novel I wrote. I think I wrote it in 4.5 months,
Wow.
and I didn't even write every day.
Dang.
And but then for the next novel, it was a little more planned, a little more of a
Mhm.
process. I started to kind of mine my own, biography and history a little bit, and because All Things Left Wild was set in 1910 in the Southwest Territories and in West Texas. And then River Sing Out, which was my second novel, I really switched it up, which I'm sure my publisher loved, because they're like, "Hey, we're getting this guy that writes historical westerns." And then I was like, "Actually, my second novel is set in present day East Texas, and it's a crime novel."
Completely
But
other
yeah,
direction.
yeah, for my second novel, it was just I wanted to talk a little bit about where I was from and some of the
Mhm.
hardships that folks face there, and kind of like the cyclical nature of poverty and crime in East Texas along the Neches River. And so that was one thing. And then Beast of the Earth, which comes out October 11th. That was This is based on a short story that I wrote back in 2015 when I was first trying to figure out if I could
Mhm.
actually do this writing gig or not. And I wrote a very short story based on one day in the life of this groundskeeper who stumbled upon a murder. Um, and there was just the character Harlan LeBlanc, who's the groundskeeper. He'd kind of just been nagging at me for several years, and when it came time to start the third novel, I thought, well, why don't I at least try to see if I can make this short story into something a little
Mhm.
bigger and kind of explore why LeBlanc is the way he is and all that. And so yeah, so those are the three that I have, and then we'll have to see in the future where these ideas come from, because I it's not for me, it's not writer's block. It's not a lack of ideas. It's writer's indecision,
Yeah.
right? It's like, which idea do I pursue? And then once I'm in a story, once I'm writing
Mhm.
a novel, it's which direction do I take it? What decisions do the characters make? And that's where I get. I mean, look, it's hard enough for me to pick something on the Netflix queue. I will just sit there and scroll and scroll and scroll until I've wasted the time that I would have been watching
Yeah.
something anyway. And so yeah, so when it comes to actually making decisions for the writing, it's really tough, because every potential path or outcome, I
Mhm.
go, well, that's good, but could it be better? What if they did this, or what if they did
Yeah.
this? And it's very hard to turn that off. And so oftentimes I think that writer's indecision is much harder than writer's block, because at least with writer's block, if something does come to you, then okay, by God, I can write this.
This
But
is
with
my
writer's
idea.
indecision, it's just everything all the time. So
Do you ever like take so if you have multiple ideas floating around up there and like you're writing one book, do you ever like just take other ideas and kind of go, okay, how maybe this other idea could kind of fit into this idea?
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I will write scenes that go down one path,
Mhm.
knowing that if I don't go that way, that they're not going to be usable, at least not in that book.
Mhm.
I always keep, when I'm writing, I always keep a separate Word doc open called scraps. So if there's
Oh.
something that I really like in the novel, but I know it needs to be cut,
Mhm.
then it makes it a little, it makes it hurt a little less in the moment to put
Not
it in this
deleted
giant file
forever.
called scraps. Cause it's like, well, maybe one day I can use it
Uh,
for something else. And sometimes it happens, but more often
mm,
than not, it doesn't. And it just stays in the scrap pile, but that's okay. One, because I've got a healthy scrap pile, and two, because it does make it a little easier at the time, and it's
Yeah.
usually something, everybody's heard the kill your darlings thing. It
Yes.
usually is the right call at the time to make the
Mm,
novel a little leaner and cleaner and all that. But yeah, I don't think anything you write is wasted, even if it's something that
yeah.
you never, you look at it and go, well, I'm going to cut this and I'm not even going to put it in the scrap pile because I know I'm never going to use it.
Mm,
Well, just by writing it, maybe you've expelled or expunged some bad writing from
yep.
yourself, or an idea that wasn't great, but at least you got it out. And
Mm,
um, but there are tons of things, like, all, I think, just about every great author that I've studied, even just a little bit, there has been signs in their work and in their papers where, like, they were writing one novel and they had a certain scene that they liked, but it didn't fit. And then
mm.
sure enough, it shows up 2, 3 novels down the road, and um, usually if the writing is worth it, it'll find a way to get published. It'll find a way to sneak in somewhere.
It's like you have this scene, like I know this scene is really good, just not for this book.
Yeah, absolutely. This scene, or this exchanging of ideals or philosophies between
Yeah.
characters that are very good but maybe don't fit who the
Mm,
characters turn out to be, in the novel. Because that's a big part of it for me, is as I'm writing, I want to be as true as I can to these characters as
mm,
they develop. And a lot of times characters end up being not who I thought they might be in the beginning, right?
yeah.
It just, that's kind of the way it goes. But I want to give them room to wiggle around, just the same way that I want to give myself room to wiggle. And so yeah, there might be something like, well, I wrote this early on in the novel that Jim was going to say these things, but as it turns out, Jim would never say these things. But I
This
would love
isn't
for
him.
someone to say them sometime in
They're
some
good
novel
words.
somewhere. So into the scrap pile they go.
So whenever you say it, so you don't really plan out your character development. You let that come more like a discovery of the natural process.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a balance, right? Like, I
Mm,
know where I want it to go, and I know where I think it'll go,
yeah.
but it doesn't always turn out that way.
Mm,
And certainly, I mean, when I come up with an idea for a story, I will have the main character, main protagonist, antagonist, couple others,
mm,
but the finished book is going to have dozens of characters,
yeah.
and I don't come up with those for the outline. I just kind of let that happen naturally. So let's say your main character goes into a diner to get a sandwich.
Mm,
What does the person behind the counter look like? Is it a
yeah.
old woman who chain smokes cigarettes and has owned this diner for 80 years? Is it a young nervous kid who this is his first job?
Mm,
And so I kind of let that happen naturally, and then let that guide the flow of conversation. And so, yeah, so a lot of times that's kind of where, like, I might write what I think is a good conversation or a good philosophical discussion, but then realize that either A, this character would never say that, or B, this diner is not the appropriate place. It's not the appropriate spot in the novel to have this conversation. And so we can move it to somewhere else, or again, we can just put it in that scrap pile. And if it's worthy, if I
uh,
feel strongly enough about it, then I'll find a place for it somewhere at some time.
well, kind of like how you talked about, you got that idea of the two kids running, through the desert. It's like, I imagine you sometimes would be going through the scrap pile and you might just stumble upon something, go, there's something there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and that's the thing is, I mean, I have notebooks upon notebooks filled with just random scribbles. Some of them are
Mm,
ideas for stories, some of them are actual descriptions of whatever I'm looking at. If I'm on a hike and I see
yeah.
something and it kind of strikes me, I might write down a few, thoughts.
Mm,
My notes app on my phone just looks
I
like the
love that
ravings of an
app so
absolutely
much.
batshit crazy person.
Uh-huh.
Um, Especially because I usually only use that when I'm like in bed and I'm trying to fall asleep, and I get like something, and I,
That's when you
I
get
like
the
roll over and
idea,
I just
right?
I try I type where my thumbs think the letters are, and hope that it comes out sounding something like what's in
Uh,
my head. But yeah, you're right. Those ideas can come from anywhere, and because of that, I obsess over never letting an idea fall through the cracks and just writing
mm,
it down, to where if I stumble over it one day, maybe it will spark something. And you never know, because that is the commitment for me anyway. Again, at this
yeah.
point, is the hardest part. It's committing to an idea. It's committing to those decisions. I mean, if you're going to write a novel, it's going to take let's be super liberal and lenient and say like 1 year of your life,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
if I'm staring at a blank page
Mm-hmm.
and I proceed with this idea for a novel that I have, then the further that I get into it, the more time and effort and energy I put into it. It's going to take a year of my life. Like I need to make sure that it's something that's going to have me fired up and excited to come to
Mm-hmm.
work every day. And that's just on like the writing side of it. And then of course on like the career financial side of it, it's got, I've got to make sure it's something that's going to pan out, and I'm not going to
Actually
have to start
sell.
over and call my
Mm-hmm.
publisher and go, I'm so sorry, you're not going to have your book on time, and stuff like that. So
What is it that does that for you? Like, say you have 10 ideas in your mind. What is it that makes you go, I think this is the one?
yeah, just I draw up a bracket like March Madness and just flip a coin, heads or tails for each one. No,
I
no,
got
I honestly I don't know. Like it's scary because I don't know. And so that's why I always like am constantly questioning whether or not I made the wrong decision. And I think that the most important part for me over the past few years when choosing a project is do the themes that I want to talk about, and again, like I mentioned earlier, do these very timeless but not timely themes that a lot of people don't want to talk about. Can I incorporate them into this novel in a way that is both honest without being overhanded,
Yeah.
and then also worthy without being forced?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, does the story naturally lend itself to a discussion about this? And can I discuss it without sounding preachy? Like those are the two biggest things.
Yeah.
And so once I've established that the story can do that, then I ask myself all the other questions that are probably a lot more prudent. But like, does the plot hold up?
Mm-hmm.
Is this something that I'm comfortable writing about, or am I going to have to research myself into a grave? Because I always do a lot of research, but
Uh,
my buddy Taylor Brown, who is for my money one of the top writers that we have these days. Taylor Brown
I
wrote Gods of Howell Mountain, just a phenomenal
heard of that.
southern literary book. But he just came out with this book called Wing Walkers, and it's historical fiction, and it's about folks who would walk out on the wings of
Mm.
early airplanes, as part of like a carnival show.
Oh yeah.
And I just can't imagine that. And Taylor, feel free if you're watching this to just comment and correct me. I can't imagine that Taylor Brown had a intrinsic built-in knowledge of what wing walking was like, but you would never know that he didn't based
Mm.
on reading this novel. So I'm assuming he did God knows how much research. And while I do really enjoy the research process, it's got to be about a topic that I at least am
You gotta be
already.
into it.
Yeah, if I'm not familiar with it, then I at least have
Mm.
to be really, really curious, really
Yeah.
intrigued, which I'm assuming Taylor probably was with Wing Walkers. But yeah. So anyway, there are all those kind of secondary things of does it
Mm.
fit this, does it fit that? But the biggest one is can I talk about the themes I want to talk about in a way that's not forced and not preachy? And if the story does that, and of course I think we all have we grew up on movies. Even the most voracious of readers are
Oh,
also
all the
movie
watch
watchers, and
movies.
I think you just have some scenes in your head, right? Like
Uh,
of like
yeah.
how you think it would look, or whatever. And honest, that's a lot of times when I'm halfway through the novel and I want to do anything but write this novel, I have to kind of go back to that almost vision board, the
Mm.
aesthetic that's in my head, the song that was playing when I, like whatever, just to kind of get me back in that
Yeah.
zone and that mood, and that's the fun stuff, honestly. Like
Mm.
that's the part that makes this whole gig worth it, man. Is like it is this very artistic, it's a vibe, it's a frequency, and you just tune into it. You tune into this frequency and you are sucked into the world of your novel. Whether it's fantasy or whether it's like the
Mm.
most realism thing that you could write, and like you just immediately you're absorbed into that world, and it's pretty awesome feeling.
That's what like makes it worth it. It's like those days where
100%.
you're just on fire going at it. So it sounds like basically you kind of start with a theme and then you take that with like some kind of idea. And that's like you kind of run with that in a direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I want to. The themes for me are pretty unchanging. They
Mm,
might vary a little bit, or I might come at them in a different direction, but like the themes are kind of always going to be the same,
yeah.
or at least they have been, and at least
Uh,
right now they haven't changed. But if I can cycle through these story ideas in my head, then I can see which one matches up with those themes the best. Like which one naturally allows which one is a natural marriage, right?
yeah.
Like how can I talk about poverty and religion and choice and circumstance and life and death, and how can I take that and apply it to this story in a way that is very smooth and again not forced, not to where like
Yeah.
the something happens at the end of the day, the sheriff turns around and like has this like very obvious, very heavy-handed monologue about justice or something, right? Like
Restate the
I don't.
entire theme of the book to the reader.
Yeah, exactly. Like the bad guy like says everything that he was thinking, and so
Uh,
yeah, so I want it to feel as natural as possible, and so and usually that's the story that's gonna
mm,
flow,
yeah.
and feel the most natural just on its own as a story, not to mention, when I insert the a little bit of the heavier themes or whatever. And so yeah, and again, who knows if I'm doing it right. I think that's one of the kind of the fun things that I sometimes when I start to worry too much, I have to step back and realize like I don't really know what I'm doing, and that's okay because no one does.
Mm,
Like we talked about, we don't know what's going to sell. We don't know what critics are going to decide is like very poignant or very
yeah.
profound versus overwrought or unoriginal. Like it just so
You just
much
don't
of this
know.
gig is luck and timing. We talked about earlier about how Mark is very quick,
Mm,
uh, or at least that's what it seems like. He's very quick
yeah.
on picking up folks when he likes their manuscript. Well, I had agents that I queried at the same time as Mark that came back to me weeks, some of them even months later, with rejections. And I thought to myself, what if Mark wasn't quick, and what if Mark had waited, 2 months or whatever, and I'm getting
Yeah.
these rejections in the meantime? I'm probably down on myself.
Yeah.
Self confidence would have been low. Self doubt would have been high. And then in the end, I still would have ended up with Mark, and it would have been this great thing. And so to me, that
Mm,
just illustrates how completely useless self doubt
yeah.
is when it comes to this stuff because you can't control it. You can only control what you can control, which is the writing and coming to work every day and trying to put your best foot forward. And at the end of the day, it is just luck. It's luck and timing. I mean, all you need is one yes from an agent, and all that agent needs is one yes from a publisher, and
Two
then it
yeses and
doesn't
you're
it
good.
doesn't matter how many rejections you had.
Mm. That's what kind of something I've thought about, like people who like, let's say you're gonna quit writing. It's like the story, they're still there. Like,
Right.
it's not like, like if I quit doing accounting, it's like, yeah, I'll never go like do accounting. But it's like, yeah, stories. They're always gonna be they're like haunting you almost.
Yeah. Well, but that's what's so cool about writing. Like if you quit accounting, it's very unlikely that you're gonna go and ask some random business if they'll show you their books for
Yeah.
free just so you can like, get back into the game a little bit. But with
Uh,
writing, you can do that. You can,
yeah.
whether you are published or unpublished or whatever, you can always spend an afternoon writing, or
Mm,
you can carve time each day or each weekend, or even if it's just once a month, whatever. You can always write, and the whole point of it is the whole reason that anybody starts out writing. It's not to get published, it's not to get
yeah.
rich and famous, it's because we love writing for whatever reason. Everybody's why is different,
Uh,
but nobody's why in the beginning is like, well, I don't really like writing, but I bet I could get rich and famous doing this.
I'll go
Because
become a
first of all, those are
millionaire.
terrible odds, and second of all,
Wrong
it's
field.
just not how we're drawn to this
Mm,
craft. And so, what's cool about it is even if you never get published, or if you've been published but you never get published again, or whatever, if you're published but you don't win awards or don't sell
yeah.
all the however many copies, as long as you enjoy it and you can continue to
Mm-hmm.
find your why and to have it be your guiding light,
Mm-hmm.
and you continue to harbor that joy for writing, well, then you all the other measures of success don't matter,
Yeah.
and you can look forward to a lifetime of writing, as opposed to that's a perfect example, as opposed to if you get fired from your accounting job, you probably can't look forward to a lifetime of accounting or whatever if you can't find a
I
job, but
don't.
you can always write, no matter if you're the only one
Mm-hmm.
that sees it, or if you self-publish or share it on the internet or whatever. I mean, writing will always be writing. It's not going to be any different based on what happens after you write it. It's still the same
Mm-hmm.
beautiful therapeutic process, and so in that way, we're very lucky, right? And
Yeah.
we may be unlucky in that we chose a craft that is, where the odds are stacked against us in terms of success, and that's very subjective and out of our control, and all of
Uh,
these things that we've mentioned. But in this other way, in this very beautiful
mm,
way, we are the ones that get to uh, sustain and maintain our joy for writing, and no one can take that from us. And so again, that's like the third or fourth time that I'm going to sound incredibly corny, but it's true,
it
man. It
is
really is.
true. It really is like, and let's say forget publishing. It's like you're never going to have a good writing day, or like you're never going to sit down do a bunch of writing and then feel worse about it. Like it's
That's
hard to
so
look at
true.
something you've
That's
written
so
and then
true.
feel bad. It's like you're gonna feel good about this. It's like, yeah, for even or like finishing a manuscript, finishing your first book. It's like, yeah, maybe it never gets published, but it's like you wrote a
just
book.
by just by finishing a manuscript, you've put yourself in such a small percentage, not just of people that have
Exactly.
ever lived, but of people that have ever written. I mean, how many folks do we know that are like, yeah, I've been working on this book for 30 years, or
Yeah.
whatever. And hey, more power to them, by the way, because at least they're
Mm,
still working on it. But
yeah.
there are so many people that want to write a manuscript, and either they never start, or certainly they
Mm,
never finish. I mean, so it just, I've got to think that percentage of folks that actually start and finish a manuscript is so low. And that's why I was thrilled when I finished my first manuscript, and I
yeah.
had no idea if I would ever get an agent or a publishing deal or any of that stuff. I mean, I
Mm,
was just like, if I just put this in a drawer, at least I can always say that I did it,
you actually
and
wrote a book.
that meant so much at the time,
Yeah.
and so yeah. Anyway, I'm with you. I'm with you 100% on
I
this
mean,
one.
like if you interviewed like 1,000 people, it's like how many could say they've actually written a book? It's like one?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. But you constantly hear folks that want to, or that say,
yeah,
one day I will, or whatever. And
eventually.
yeah, exactly. But it's like, no, you have to actually do the work, and
Yeah.
it is something that if you do the work and you finish it, you should be so proud of it, no matter what happens after that.
For kind of our last question tonight, but what is like one piece of advice you would have to say writers who are, they're working on their manuscripts, they're not done yet, and they're kind of struggling?
Ooh, I'll do just like some speed versions. One is just read, 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 read. Like if you start to struggle, if you have writer's block, or you hit kind of a wall, uh, Stephen Graham Jones, who's a really great author, I read an interview with him one time where he said, "I try to eat so much fiction that I vomit it back up." Right?
Oh,
Like just
smart.
read so much that you can't help but need to write,
Mm,
and I think that's very true for the majority of writers. Is like the more we read, the more we get inspired, and want to keep writing. So read, number one. Number two, show yourself some grace, man. Like it is such a delicate balance between being self-disciplined, to putting your ass in the chair and making sure that you
yeah.
actually are writing and doing the work, but at the same time, you know, give yourself, cut yourself a little bit of slack, give yourself a little bit of a leash,
Mm,
and know that it's going to be okay. Like, if you go a few days and your project isn't where you want it to be, or you do find yourself kind of
mm,
with writer's block or stuck or something, like just know that it's not going to be like that forever. um and other than that, yeah, read, cut yourself slack, and just keep going. Like
yeah.
it's just a numbers game. That's all it is. We've all heard the stories about the famous authors and best-selling novels that were rejected a ton of times, and so
Hmm.
develop thick skin. You'll be fine. You're doing this for you first and foremost, and
Exactly.
and then who knows what'll happen after that.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm gonna have your social media and your books linked down below in the description. Can they pre-order your newest book yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah,
Awesome.
Beast of the Earth is out October 11th, but you can pre-order it now from wherever you do your book shopping. I'd love it to be your local indie bookstore. They'll pre-order it for you, but I understand there's a lot of folks like myself that live out in the middle of nowhere, and you might not have a local indie bookstore. And so if you need to order it online, there's Bookshop and all kinds of great places to get it, and of course Amazon as well. But yeah, you can order it, and if you like it or if you don't like it, you can email me, or Alex is going to throw up the socials, so you can message me
Mhm.
and tell me what you liked or what you didn't like, or ask me questions about writing.
That's
A lot of
awesome.
folks say reach out, you're not bothering me, and I really mean it. I love talking to writers about writing, and I always have time for everybody. So
That's so
any
awesome.
questions y'all have, just holler at me.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Hey
I'm
man,
gonna
thank you, Alex. I really appreciate you having me on.
thank you.